Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our sales conversation. Today's discussion is about defending key customers from competition. 5 ways to defend your key accounts. So here you see a wall in the city. One is the customer, one is the competitor. Who's defending who? Is the competitor preventing you from getting through to the customer, the city? Or could it be the case customer is the wall defending you from overcoming your competitor? I think that's often the case. Is delighting the customer enough? What can pure selling do? What can we do ourselves? Now, let's say your biggest customers have been stable for years. Maybe there's no need to worry, and yet your toughest competitors are probably gunning for your key accounts right now. An example, I had a Fortune 500 client, and we were doing a program, and there was one rep who had legacy customers, 20-year relationships, and he wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to the ideas until he lost one of his major clients. There was a change in a higher level decision maker, and we got tossed out without even giving a second look. We were just thrown out. And now this salesperson was highly engaged because it turns out that the things we normally teach in sales training are very helpful in retaining your existing customers. Here's one case that I could mention. I spent 10 years till I closed a relationship with a small publicly traded company, Valley Bank. So your competitors are gunning for your key accounts all the time. Now, you may think you're safe because you're the trusted advisor, you're the incumbent. And so it's easy for you, you get called in, you have access, it's like you roll the ball downfield, whereas your competitor is trying to break in and it's very hard. They're kicking the ball upfield. Well, let me tell you what your competitors are doing. They're trying to level the playing field. They're trying to level the playing field even before they get in order. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We'll include lessons from a neat book called Maneuver, The Art of Maneuver. So 2 of the strategies I'll briefly mention are the dislocation strategy and the preemptive strike. Now, the dislocation strategy is trying to shift the battlefield from one where they can't win to they have to win. So let me give you a case like with selling. I focus on sales culture, and in my experience, not a whole lot of other people do that. The preemptive strike, and you'll see examples of this, is like going up in the food chain and winning the business before you even have an idea that you're at risk. And this is what your competition is doing with your very biggest accounts. They're trying to establish a dislocation strategy, that is, moving the battlefield from one where they don't have a chance to one where they have to win, and they're doing it on a preemptive basis. You're not even aware of it. A case history. I work with a billing and collecting services company where competitors were the incumbent and they were 50% less expensive. So as compared to our offering, we cost twice as much. They thought they were safe. But we came up with a program where we focused on results, especially our customers had a 95% reduction in bankruptcy risk. That was the dislocation strategy. We shifted from a battlefield where we had no chance, we were twice the price, to one where we own the space, bankruptcy risk reduction. Our closing ratio went from 20 to 40%. Here's a personal example. With my first business where I sold decorative tin packaging, and it went higher in the food chain. You may have heard of Mr. Coffee. They used to do a decorative tin. I was selling decorative tins. The buyer didn't even want to talk to me. So what I did is I went to the marketing department and I offered them some special designs which interested them, but that wasn't enough. I know I needed to meet with them. One day I was working in the field. I spent a week in the field in the Chicagoland area making sales calls. And we knew we needed to get in and have a belly-to-belly call with the marketing decision maker, or we would never close. And so while we were in the field, I remember we made a phone call and we said, "You must see us. This is the voice of moral authority." We got in to see the marketing person. We closed them on it. It was do or die to get that meeting. We closed on it. And the net result was one day I got a call from the buying department saying, "Who the hell are you?" I was going to buy from the other guy. It was a preemptive strike with a dislocation strategy. In this case, the dislocation strategy were the designs that I brought in. And what I used was the voice of moral authority. You must see us. So that's what your competition is doing. So here's your first idea. Do a relationship grid. On the left side, you have the accounts. On the top, you have key decision makers. And the way you use a relationship grid, green, you have a great relationship, hopefully trusted advisor. Yellow, some relationship. Red, no relationship. So you may have a great relationship with the functional decision maker, but you're at risk here because your competition is going to come in at a higher level. So one of the ways you have to use your great trusted advisor relationships are to be introduced to other people. So many times I personally have done this, where I went in at the CEO level, my competitor was coming in at the functional decision maker. Are you connected high enough? You think you have a trusted advisor relationship. You think everything is terrific. You're afraid of going around the lower level decision maker. You're afraid of ruining the relationship. Your competition has nothing to lose because they have no relationship. They go higher in the food chain. My recommendation is always start higher, and you can be referred down to a functional decision maker, and always recruit your key contacts for introductions to meet the higher level folks in your organization. So your first idea today is do a relationship grid. Look for your weak spots and start filling in those relationships. Your second idea, the use of testimonials and video testimonials, a great selling tool. But it's not always obvious that a testimonial is great for a moat strategy, because after a customer gives you a testimonial, what's the likelihood they're going to give the next big order to your competitor? In Cialdini's classic, The Psychology of Persuasion on Influence, self-consistency is one of the great motivators. A buyer wants to be consistent with his or her self-image. If they write a strong testimonial for you, it's likely you're going to get the near-term business. So I always say it's useful to get a testimonial, even if you, and I would recommend this, just stick it in a drawer and don't use it. And when can you get a testimonial? Be sure you're using the magic moment of access effectively. The magic moment of access is when the prospect, your client rather, tells you they love you, everything's going great, you have access, it's a good time to ask for a testimonial. The defensive case of the new buyer. I had a client who had 20% of his business with one customer. And we worked for and we got a testimonial from the owner who we saw infrequently. Well, then a crisis occurred, black swan event. It was found that the existing buyer was taking bribes from one or two of the vendors. They brought in a new buyer, and the new buyer had the mission to sweep clean all new vendors. This is 20% of our business. Well, we got a meeting and we showed him the testimonial from the owner, and that really saved the relationship. Idea number 3, solving the innovator's dilemma. Solving the innovator's dilemma. We have to be valuable enough to our client to get upstream inside information. This is the classic marketing approach, right? You find out what the client needs and you deliver it. But the idea of the innovator's dilemma, it's pictured this book by Christensen, is that in a time of change, particularly technological change, if you ask your client what you should supply and you do it, but you're not staying abreast of technological or market trends, you're going to go bankrupt. The case they gave in the book, one of the dominant cases, is disk drive manufacturers, which went from 13-inch to, I think, either 11 or 7, and then 5 1/4, then 3 1/2. And at each iteration, if the sales team asked the buyer, what do you want? They would say, well, make the same product, but make it so it's faster, cheaper, and holds more data. And then there would be a leapfrog in the technology, and the whole industry that made like 13-inch disk drives for mainframes in the 1960s went out of business. So this is where the classic marketing approach fails, is where there's change taking place. And so it's a two-way street, and you need to coach the prospect on the future. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to look at. So it's a two-way street. You need to hear what they're doing and meet the short-term demands, but also coach them on the future. It's a two-way street. If you're not coaching them on the future, your competition is, and you're going to be at risk. How do you ensure a long relationship with a customer? Some brands are so long, they last over 100 years, like Coca-Cola, Ivory Soap. How do they last so long? And the answer is nonstop innovation. You need to support your client on this point with nonstop innovation. Think about Coca-Cola. The formulation has been changed so many times. Until about 1910, there was cocaine in it. The packaging changed. Dispensed at a drugstore as a prescription item, glass bottles, cans, plastic, distribution, drugstore, supermarkets, mass market, convenience stores, and advertising. It's a story of nonstop innovation. The way brands and products and companies last for a long time is through nonstop innovation. Ask yourself the question, how are you supporting the innovation? What kind of type 3 knowledge do you bring? There are 3 types of knowledge. Type 1 is what you know. Type 2 is what you know you don't know. Type 3 is what you don't realize you don't know. For every meeting, the preparation is always, what wisdom are you bringing? What type 3 knowledge are you bringing? A case history. This is, again, a preemptive strike dislocation strategy, right? So it's a hotel company. We're targeting a healthcare like a pharma. They book 300 to 400 room nights a year in our territory, and our hotel room costs 50% more than the incumbent competitor. For a year, the saleswoman was attacking, going after it, but the prospect kept on saying, a bed's a bed, you're all the same. I'm not paying 50% more. So where the only important closing condition is price, we can't win. We need to add a condition. This is what your competitors will do, even if you're a low-cost provider. They'll add a condition through wisdom. What did we do here? So we prepared a program, we did our research. Now the saleswoman calls the buyer who said, you're all the same. Why are you calling me? But now the saleswoman challenges the decision maker, and she says, I'm surprised to hear you say that. This is a way to enter into a challenge situation. I'm surprised to hear you say that. Now, most salespeople, or many I should say, will feel uncomfortable doing this. They see it as, it's offensive, it's risky, and we call those social sellers. Business sellers will challenge the thinking and say, I'm surprised to hear you say that. The buyer said, what do you mean? Saleswoman said, well, doesn't anything matter except for price? Buyer said, no, it's all price. The bed's the same. And then she said, the saleswoman, what about a good night's sleep? What do you mean, says the buyer. So we sent type 3 knowledge, a Harvard Business Review study. Sleep deficit is a performance killer. That was the dislocation strategy to move from a battlefield where we couldn't win, what's your lowest price, to one where we have a shot. Well, what do you mean? Why should this matter? Well, because productivity goes up with a good night's sleep, and we're known for a good night's sleep. So it took more than just this, but it opened a discussion, and within 6 days we closed it. We got all the business at a 50% higher price. Now, the point is not that you could always win with wisdom, nor is it the case that your competition always will. But if they come in with good wisdom, this was a case in point, you could lose a long-standing relationship. So what's better is you do the research yourself and you bring the wisdom to your customer. And you do it with level 5 leadership. Level 5 leadership is discussed in Collins' Good to Great. A level 5 leader is strong, competent, dominant, and humble. And the humility shows to your ability to learn. Now, you might say, well, wait a second, Andy. Isn't it the case either we're strong, competent, or we're humble? In another book, Collins and Porras calls that the tyranny of the or. So great leaders, great salespeople are dominant, strong, competent, and humble. A great way to do this is with this metaphor they offer us, Collins offers us, the window and the mirror. When things are going well, we look outside the window and we say, wow, who could we give credit to in our team? We have a great team. When things aren't going well, we look in the mirror and we ask ourselves, what could I have done differently? Now, the opposite, and this is a dysfunctional scenario, and this opens yourself to attack by a competitor, is reverse these. When things go well, you pat yourself on the back and you say, I'm doing a great job. And when things don't go well, you blame someone else. You look outside the window. So if you're on the back and thinking you're doing a great job, your competitor is trying to win your business. So the opposite of the mirror is learned helplessness. There was nothing we could do. My standard is to test 5 new ideas a week. One of my programs is a 16-week sprint. I did this with one client where every week, every salesperson had 2 targets. And if what we did in the first week did not open the account or at least a good conversation, we did something else for 16 weeks. And at the end of that period, and we were going after owners and presidents and COOs, we got through to 70% of our audience, and we closed a good number of them. The point I'm bringing up is, what if your competition is coming in with a new idea every week for 16 weeks? Better you should do it first, right? So are you being innovative enough? 4th idea, some applications. Prepare for every interaction. What wisdom are you bringing to the meeting? Are you bringing ideas to save money, increase sales, build a long-term strategic position, advance the relationship? And make sure there are takeaways for your customer at the end of every meeting. So a good question at the end of every meeting is, what were your takeaways? And if you didn't see that you were delivering value, it may be the case that you have work to do. So commit yourself to being of value. This is a way, by the way, I open meetings. I'll say, my objective here is that you'll have takeaways. How about I go first? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And then if you find it compelling, you'll tell me your most urgent challenges. So commit yourself to always bringing value. This is a script I'll use to try to take business away from the incumbent. This is how I begin. Your last idea is for today is how to overcome confirmation bias. A great danger that we have, especially with existing accounts, is there's no problems. So you miss the no signals. The no signals meaning we may lose a customer. Confirmation bias is malignant optimism. It's not being hard-headed and looking at the facts on the ground. So there are 2 suggestions I have. Always watch the PIKs, the payments in kind. These are the behaviors that the buyer does to show that they're committed. And then learn from Tetlock about the pre-mortem. So Tetlock and Gardner wrote a book called Super Forecasters, in which they talk about how a group of super forecasters they have found can do way better than the average person or even our intelligence agencies at predicting the future. And in this book, there are 10 rules for super forecasters. And I recommend the one called the pre-mortem. The pre-mortem, you know what a post-mortem is? It's like after you lose the business, you try to figure out why. The pre-mortem is the post-mortem before the end of the selling process. So you ask yourself, when you think you have a good chance of closing the business, you ask yourself, why will I never close this business? And you look for chinks in your armor. We once did this, you know, with a salesperson who wasn't performing and was promising to close a huge pharmaceutical company, Pfizer. And what came out of the pre-mortem is he didn't know a decision maker 1 or 2 levels up, and that was related to why he never got the business. So the question is, why will you definitely lose this key account? You think you got it made. You should ask yourself the question, why am I going to definitely lose it? Look for weakness and then rectify it. So here's our recap on today's presentation. What pure selling can do. Manage the relationship grid. Get testimonials. Overcome the innovator's dilemma, which means lead the customer in addition to being led by him. Evince level 5 leadership, which is strength and humility, and use the pre-mortem. And be sure that you're developing, as a 6th point, social and business relationships. By the way, we have over 150 best practices in urgency-based selling that we help clients use to win business from their competitors. Well, we know that Rome wasn't built in a day. We have a few minutes for questions, so if you have questions, please put that in the chat. You might want to think about your takeaways. If you have any questions afterwards, write to me at andyg@urgencybasedselling.net. If you're interested in some of my ideas on type 3 knowledge, improving your innovation, our book Innovate Now, our free consulting session, please write to me at this Andy G. And we also have, by the way, a 15-minute executive briefing that is like relationship changing. So if any of this interests you, write to me. Our next webinar on January 15th is 4 ways to be an innovative seller. So that's our next webinar if you're interested in that subject. We're going to develop and build on ideas I mentioned today. And now we have time for a few minutes of questions. I see we have one right here. My customers like to have 2 to 3 sources at all times. How do you have a defensive strategy of becoming a trusted advisor when the buyer is committed to 2 to 3 vendors at all times? Well, I don't think that we should only confine ourselves to looking at a defensive position for all the business. We could also look at it from the perspective of defending what we have and using some of the tactics perhaps that have been mentioned, like nonstop innovation, to win business from the competitor. The typical buyer in my business, in my industry, says things like this. Next question. To get in the ball game, for me to even talk to you, you have to have outstanding quality and service. So if everybody has outstanding quality and service, it all comes down to price. He's a price shopper. They're all price shoppers. How do I create a defensive position, become a trusted advisor? Well, there are a couple of things I would bring to your attention. The first is I believe they're bluffing. And the second is it is possible you're talking to the wrong person in the hierarchy. You might need to go higher in the food chain. But wait a second, Andy, won't that ruin the relationship? Well, you got to evaluate what kind of relationship you have. On the innovator's dilemma, go over this point again about, telling customers what they should do. My approach is I ask the customers what to do and I do it. And that works. Again, this is just kind of a reminder, that works to a large extent if it's a time without change. But if there's changes in trends and competition, and particularly in technology, ultimately your customer is going to change or become a dinosaur and get wiped out. So since you have the leading edge there, you're in there, coach them, let them know. And again, you may have to go higher in the food chain. Pre-mortem, isn't that negative thinking, Andy, to say, why am I definitely going to lose this account? We need to be positive. What do you have to say about that? Well, the way we envision the pre-mortem is at a brainstorming technique. So it's not an either or. That would be a tyranny of the or. It's not either you're positive or you do the pre-mortem, which is why I'm going to definitely lose this business. It's something you do to make yourself invulnerable so you don't lose out to the competition. My main customers rotate buyers every few years to make sure there are no close buyer-seller relationships. How do you get a defensive position there? Well, the very fact that you're an incumbent supplier, I think, gives you a certain level of defensiveness from the organizational point of view. Like, organizations don't like risk. And so if a new buyer comes in and they know something works, nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, is the old cliche. And in general, if everybody's happy with you, that gives you some defensibility. But you also might find that higher up in the food chain, there's less turnover. And this, again, is another reason why it's important to go higher in the food chain, because the functional decision maker may be changing every couple of years, but higher level executives might remain the same. Well, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, write to me at andyg@urgency. Look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about ways to be an innovative seller. Thanks again for joining us. Happy holidays. Have a great month.